Have you ever wondered what the world would look like if history had taken a different turn? What if the war to end all wars, World War I, had ended not with an Allied victory, but with a German one? It's a question that sends ripples through everything we know about the 20th century and beyond. Forget what you learned in history class for a moment. Let's step through the looking glass into an alternate reality where the German Empire didn't collapse in 1918, but instead stood victorious. How would this have happened? And what would the consequences be? First, let's set the stage. For Germany to win, a few key moments would have had to go differently. Picture this. It's 1914, the Schlieffen Plan. Germany's ambitious strategy to knock France out of the war quickly by invading through Belgium almost worked. In our timeline, it stalled at the Battle of the Marne. But what if it hadn't? What if German forces had been just a little faster, a little stronger, and had managed to encircle Paris? France, facing a swift and decisive defeat, might have been forced to surrender within months. With France out of the picture, Germany could then pivot its entire military might to the Eastern Front against Russia, long before the United States ever thought about joining the war. Another possibility lies in 1917. The German High Command made a fateful decision: unrestricted submarine warfare. They knew it would likely draw the United States into the conflict, but they were betting they could starve Britain into submission before American troops could arrive in significant numbers. It was a massive gamble that failed. But what if it had succeeded? Imagine German U-boats being even more effective, sinking more supply ships, and bringing Britain to its knees. A Britain facing famine and economic collapse might have been forced to sue for peace. Without its key European allies, alone America might have been unwilling or unable to turn the tide. So, let's assume one of these scenarios plays out. Germany stands victorious in 1918. What happens next? The Treaty of Versailles, as we know it, would never exist. Instead, we'd likely see something like the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which Germany imposed on Russia, but on a much grander scale. This would be a victor's peace, designed to secure German dominance over Europe for generations. Let's start with the map of Europe. It would be almost unrecognizable. In the west, Germany would likely annex territories from France, like the Longwy-Briey Iron Basin, crippling French industry for decades. Belgium would almost certainly become a German vassal state, its independence a mere formality. Luxembourg would be absorbed directly into the German Empire. The goal wouldn't just be to win the war, but to ensure France could never again pose a threat. But the biggest changes would be in the east. The concept of Mitteleuropa, a German-dominated Central Europe, would become a reality. Germany would establish a series of satellite kingdoms and duchies across Eastern Europe, carved out of the defeated Russian Empire. Poland, Ukraine, the Baltic states, they would all become puppet regimes, economically and militarily dependent on Berlin. The Kaiser's dream of German influence stretching from the North Sea to the Black Sea would be fulfilled. This vast economic bloc would be controlled by Germany, providing it with resources, agricultural land, and a captive market for its industrial goods. What about the other empires? The Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany's main ally, would likely survive, at least for a while. With German backing, it might have been able to suppress the nationalist movements brewing within its borders, although it would essentially become the junior partner in a German-led alliance. The Ottoman Empire, another ally, might also have held on longer, retaining control over much of the Middle East, which would drastically alter the history of that region. There would be no British or French mandates, no Sykes-Picot Agreement drawing the lines we see today. The destinies of Iraq, Syria, and Palestine would be tied to a surviving German-allied Ottoman state. And what about life inside this victorious German Empire? Socially and politically, it would likely remain a conservative, authoritarian monarchy. The Kaiser and the military elite, vindicated by their victory, would hold immense power. The push for democratic reforms that was gaining steam before the war would be crushed. Germany would be a proud, militaristic, and deeply nationalistic society. It wouldn't be the liberal democracy that emerged after World War II, but rather an amplified version of the pre-war empire. Now, for the big question, would World War II still happen? It's highly unlikely, at least not in the way we know it. The key drivers of World War II in our timeline, the harsh Treaty of Versailles, the economic desperation of the Great Depression in Germany, and the rise of extremist ideologies fueled by national humiliation, simply wouldn't exist. There would be no Adolf Hitler rising to power on a platform of revenging the stab in the back. The Nazi Party would likely remain a fringe group of political oddballs. However, this alternate world would not be a utopia. Instead of a Second World War, you might see different kinds of conflicts. The British and American powers, though defeated in Europe, would still exist. The British Empire, though weakened, would still control its vast overseas territories. You could see a prolonged Cold War scenario emerge decades earlier, pitting the German-dominated European bloc against the maritime Anglo-American alliance. It would be a global struggle for influence, resources, and colonial territories, fought through proxy wars, espionage, and a tense naval arms race. The Russian Empire, though defeated and truncated, would be a wild card. Perhaps the Bolshevik Revolution would still happen in a smaller, rump Russian state. A communist Russia, burning with a desire for revenge against Germany, could become a major source of instability, sponsoring revolutions and resistance movements within Germany's new Eastern European Empire. The fight against communism, rather than fascism, could become the defining ideological struggle of the 20th century for Germany. Technological and social progress would also be different. Without the trauma of 2 world wars and the Holocaust, the intellectual and cultural landscape would be completely altered. The scientific minds that fled Europe for the United States in our timeline might have stayed. What would science look like if figures like Albert Einstein had remained in a victorious, confident Germany? On the other hand, the oppressive, conservative nature of the regime might have stifled artistic and social innovation. So, a German victory in World War I presents a fascinating and complex picture. It avoids the specific horrors of the Nazi regime and World War II, but it creates its own set of problems. Europe under the thumb of an authoritarian German monarchy, a perpetual state of Cold War with the Anglo-American powers, and simmering nationalist resentments across the continent. It's a world without Hitler, but also a world without the liberal democracies that define the West today. It's a stark reminder that history is not a simple story of good versus evil, and that a single, different outcome can create a world that is almost beyond our recognition. What do you think? Would a world shaped by a victorious German Empire have been better or worse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoy exploring these alternate timelines, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into the what-ifs of history. We'll see you in the next one.